10 years ago, personalized nutrition is still a marginal phenomenon and genetic sequencing of the gut microbiome was not yet accessible to everyone. Ultra-processed food was not only widespread but also the main source of nutrition in many countries. The average meat consumption in Western societies was around 600% higher than it is today and was of course not at all compatible with the Planetary Health Diet. The global population was recovering from more than 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic with lockdowns, and the socio-psychological consequences of these were not even foreseeable. The climate situation seemed hopeless, and despite global efforts, no decision could be made to phase out fossil fuels. In society as a whole, many negative developments could be observed, especially in the health of young people. Humans developed more and more intolerances, some of which were only imaginary, mostly when it came to wheat, gluten, or lactose. Initially, the imaginary intolerances were ignored in the sense of classical medicine. The term orthorexia, meaning the phobia of unhealthy food, was coined at the time. At the same time, the press spoke of the anxiety generation among young people, partly due to social anxiety, on which 2 years of COVID lockdowns certainly had their influence, as well as the shift of social contacts to the digital sphere. The phenomenon of AI friends only worsened this development. Unfortunately, things didn't look any better for younger schoolchildren when it came to social stress or the rapidly spreading picky eater syndrome, which wasn't taken seriously at first. The development of fine motor skills also became a major problem. Yes, many children could not hold their pens properly because they spent hours every day with tablets or phones. An interesting phenomenon of the anxiety generation was the millions of ASMR videos on YouTube and other social media that were consumed to calm down. ASMR had also found its way into pop music with musicians like Billie Eilish. Identifying problems in the food sector was quickly done. But cooking itself was not taken seriously by many scientists who were interested in food. They were still too attached to the idea that cooking was only a means to an end. You could say that we were the first generation for whom it was no longer economically worthwhile to cook. If you lived in a city, it was often cheaper to go out to eat than to cook for yourself. The freedom to choose and the responsibility coming with it shouldn't be underestimated. At that time, the discourse on interspecies symbiosis or social coexistence emerged in the arts. Similar to the hygiene hypothesis, which posits that an absence of microbes impairs immune system development, we propose that we may have evolved to depend on our microbes for normal brain function, such that a change in our gut microbiome could have effects on behavior. The plant-based movement became stronger and stronger in an ethical and ecological context. However, it was also associated with a healthy microbiome. It took a rethink to give the cooking, the aesthetic practice, and the microbial exchange the same value as the result, the cooked food. The development of AI in the field of science has helped to outline structural or thematic parallels and even bring together people from completely different branches of research. In a relatively short time, the previously specialized academia has opened up and cooperated in a much more interdisciplinary way in research and teaching. It became clear that the depletion of our microbiome had a strong influence on our physical health and also a previously underestimated influence on our mental health. Through regular genetic sequencing of the gut microbiome, diets could be individualized and adapted. Very soon, a niche product became a regular test available to everyone. The umbrella term, food as medicine, was on everyone's lips, but it was clear that this was only part of the solution. Just as in the hygiene hypothesis, the team was convinced that we could not separate food from its preparation. Despite the latest findings, everyone still behaved as if the body was some kind of device that had to be refueled in order to function. The complexity of our existence could not be reflected in this modernist picture. If, depending on how we define cooking, we say that humans or their ancestors have been cooking for 800,000 to 1.9 million years, the process, in the meaning of the cultural technique or aesthetic practice, is just as much a part of human development as the food itself. This is also where our point of view differed from the classic cooking ape theory. To summarize in one sentence, Wrangham attributed our brain growth and thus our development of more complex thinking to the easier digestibility of cooked food. Of course, Wrangham's theory is more complex and includes other physiological changes and the formation of social structures, as well as the definition of gender roles. The social role of eating together was also emphasized and was seen as laying the foundations for the development of language. But the link to the act of preparing food was never really closed. I speculate that it is also a late consequence of gender segregation. Even today, we still can't speak of equality, and since everyday cooking seemed to be a woman's job for hundreds of thousands of years until recently, it was simply uninteresting, like many other domestic activities for male-dominated sciences. Only professionalized cooking was reserved for men until recently, yet it is obvious that the development of tools, architecture, and, of course, later agriculture can be traced back to the way we gathered, hunted, and prepared food. Our senses are degenerating due to the lack of stimuli. It wasn't just that senses were gone, but their interaction was gone, and the digital world, where anything was possible, was suddenly an empty, dreary prison cell for a large part of our brain. Consuming ASMR videos, cookery shows, and sourdough influencers led to a kind of multisensory placebo effect or supplement drug for the brain, which is why it was so popular. When it became clear how important the interplay of haptics, olfaction, acoustics, and optics was in cooking, these findings could be linked to the interspecies discourse. Just as it was clear that our microbiome can change through the processing of sourdough, it also does so through contact with other microorganisms. Suddenly the way was paved for understanding cooking in all its complexity, as an elementary component of our existence and not just as a means to an end. To summarize, we can say that cooking today has a strong influence on the field of medicine and also on our everyday lives, social structures, and our working world. It is on par with other therapeutic techniques such as yoga. Smart kitchens were mostly about automating as much as possible, and at some point, it was like disempowering the person doing the cooking. Cooking lost all its appeal. When A.I.S. found their way into the kitchen and were able to combine mental microbial health and ecological aspects in recipe selection, it was a great help, because the parameters for how and what we should cook simply became too complex. It also made the kitchen much more energy efficient. This was because the menu planning included when the oven was heated up and you could use it to bake a casserole, a cake, a loaf of bread, and perhaps something for the neighbors. In the same way, food waste could be massively reduced with the help of AI and intelligent recipe selection. I would like to emphasize here that it is important to differentiate between what people are good at, which techniques are important, and what is perhaps too complicated for us in terms of the complexity and number of parameters, and we can use the help of technology. I am also convinced that this way of cooking will become automatic over time, and we will have to rely less on new technologies again, and perhaps also carry out microbiome analyses less often because we will learn to listen to our body's needs. Please put your headphones on and relax.